Okay, today, welcome everybody, and sorry that I probably had an example that we had a little moving forward slowly, step by step, and our intro is always the signal for you. Now it's coming up. We have a special guest today. Yes, again, we are lucky to have first time now, if I recall right, Vinnie Mirchandani, and it is
Only the first time?
the second.
Took
Help
us
me.
far too long.
What does it matter?
We have been in,
I'm glad to
The
be
thing
with
is, it's cool that we have such a knowledgeable expert in our small little hut, and that we have the audience in getting one or the other teaser on our topic, industry clouds, if it's the new way to go, or is it just phenomenon in the way of strong tree or seasonal flowers. And I'm very, very curious, especially Winnie, if you would be so kind, introduce yourself to the audience a bit. And I'm very curious about your new book.
Well, Rolf, Thomas, Marshall, great to be here. Thank you for inviting me. Introduction, how long do I have? Do I have 20 minutes? No, I'm just kidding. I'll do a quick 1 minute.
take the whole hour,
59.
man.
and then cut me off if I go longer than that. So background is I started my career at Pricewaterhouse, and I did a lot of international travel, a lot of projects around the world, the Middle East, Europe, of course in the US. And then the last assignment I had at Pricewaterhouse was they said, hey, the whole client server market is starting to open up. Why don't you start an internal research firm, like a little Gartner group internally? So I had a team and we were looking at financial products, manufacturing products, and back then it was PeopleSoft, Oracle, SAP had just entered the US market with R2. So, it was like the beginning of the client server phenomenon. In 95, I got a recruiting call from Gartner. They said, hey, if you want to do real research, come and work for a research firm. So I was at Gartner for 5 years. I was part of the group that really popularized ERP. My God, I must have helped 10,000 customers make Y2K decisions. Both.
Wow.
Because I'd come from Pricewaterhouse, I was not only covering the software space, but I was also covering the integrators who were implementing the ERP software. Okay, so great experience. A lot. I mean, just you talk about magic quadrants. When you talk to so many people, magic quadrant kind of writes itself because hey, look, I'm getting 5,000 calls related to SAP. Clearly, they're doing something right. It doesn't matter what I think, right? So, I kid with SAP executives even now. I said, "You guys owe me a lot of commissions for those 5 years."
No doubt.
And then in 2000, I had a chance to go do a startup, which failed in the end. But it was 3 years of entrepreneurial experience and frustration. And when that closed, I started Deal Architect. And Deal Architect basically does three things. So it's partly an analyst firm. It's partly a publishing firm. I've written 7 books for myself and 2 for others. And we are also an advisory firm. So I work with a number of vendors and buyer organizations on short-term projects, helping them make evaluations, negotiations, but more strategy on next generation paths. So I went a little bit over a minute, but hopefully that gives you an overview.
Now
Feel free to take your more time.
You have proven to
By the
us
way,
you
my
can.
other includes a couple of blogs. So Deal Architect is one, and New Florence is an innovation blog. And between them, over the last 18 years, I've written probably 15,000 blogs. I also have a video channel, and I have an Instagram channel. So, I'm all over social media in a certain sense, in the enterprise sense, anyways.
When will you
So
start
you've
up your
earned
TikTok?
every one of those white hairs.
Out of curiosity, your nickname, Vinnie Vertical, where does that come from?
Well, so
Very
that's
tall.
an interesting. That's one. That's one.
That's
No,
true, yeah?
I'm not that tall, Marshall. I mean, as I get older, I went to the last medical checkup I had. They said you are so much, and I said, no, I'm 2 inches taller. They go, no, you've shrunk one less.
No more.
All of you were tall compared to me.
But really vertical comes from, I have been pushing the industry, the vendors we follow, to verticalize a lot more. About 10 years ago, I did some analysis and I wrote a blog that said cloud software has been out for 20 years. In 2010, had been out for about at least 15 years, right? NetSuite started like in the mid 90s and so on. I said, it's amazing after 15 years, we only covered 20% of the enterprise. We're very strong in financials and HR and CRM, core CRM and so on. But nobody wants to do insurance claims processing. Nobody wants to do utility billing. Nobody wants to do all these really important applications by industry. What's wrong with this picture? And in the last 10 years, it hasn't improved much. Okay, so I've been pushing the industry more and more, guys. It's 80% of white space that you need to focus on. You're fighting for a very small part of the enterprise when you only go after general ledgers or MRP or core SFA or core CRM. Okay, so that's how people started saying, "My God, you are just fixated on verticals." And I said, "What else do you expect from any vertical?" So
Fair.
What does a vertical, what are key properties of a vertical solution?
I have multiple definitions. A recent note that I wrote went into some of those definitions. But I like till about 3 years ago, I had a very strong definition that said, "Are you doing an operational book of record?" Okay. So if you say you're an insurance provider, do you do claims processing? Do you manage policies? Okay. Core process. If you say you're banking, focus on banking, can you do core banking functionality? Okay, so every industry has 3 or 4 industry-specific books of record, where the master record is not a generic customer, like in healthcare. A patient record is very unique to clinical systems. Okay, so that, you should have at least 2 or 3 unique operational books of record. That is my ideal definition of a vertical software player. Now, in the last 3 years, I said definitions evolved a little bit. What I've seen is because of COVID, because of the Ukraine crisis and so on, brand new opportunities have opened up. One of which is, for example, e-mobility. The whole EV charging in Germany is a big market, right? Well, that requires some very unique functionality in terms of billing, in terms of the infrastructure management and so on. That's a unique opportunity unto itself. You've got in retail, because of COVID, we ended up with curbside pickup. We ended up with last mile delivery. Those are unique applications that have opened up. In healthcare, telemedicine opened up. Okay, so in the last 3 years, a lot more of these edge applications have become important. So I've kind of become less demanding about you need to build complete books of record to let's go after these small opportunities, deliver them quick, because people can't afford to wait for them. I mean, in healthcare, telemedicine was needed. I talked to one executive who said, Vinnie, we've tried for 20 years to popularize telemedicine in our outpatient customer base. We could only get to 2 or 3% of the penetration. Within 6 months of COVID, we were up to 50%. Okay? He said, I don't think it'll stay at 50%, but as you can imagine, if you were running a healthcare business and a vendor said, "Oh yeah, give me 2 years to develop this," you're like, "I'm going to go out of business if I don't have telemedicine within 2 weeks," right? So they're looking for quick solutions, very targeted solutions. So I've become more and more of a fan of deliver these quick, high-value applications. Okay? So either have a book of record or have some of these easy to consume, easy to implement, unique vertical applications.
Why do you think they didn't come earlier? So these easy to
Well,
consume ones.
It's a constant challenge. I mean, when I talk to vendors even today, they're like, "Hey, if I build a general ledger, I could sell 1 million of those." Addressable market is every company needs a general ledger, right? Small or
Yeah.
large in Germany or the US or Thailand, everybody needs a general ledger. Everybody needs a SFA solution. So horizontals have always been very attractive because the total market is so large. When they go into an industry, they may sell 100,000 units if they're really, really good, right? Compared to 1 million, it's small already. And VCs in particular don't like those very, very targeted applications. I've been trying to convince the market that look, once you get into an industry, those are 25-year revenue streams. Okay, so you may not sell as many, but it's a very sticky application for you. Okay, very loyal customer base, so long as you keeping up with the industry. But somehow that message is very difficult to sell to vendors. If everybody wants to write the next procurement engine or the next, basic SAP CRM system. How many are there? Thousands, right? And it's to a point where actually they're commoditizing the market. There's people who can do the core basic functionality much more efficiently at much lower cost and so on. But it's been very tough to sell vendors on build vertical applications.
Vinnie, how would you, if I might step in, Thomas, draw the definition or draw a differentiation between what in my old days, I was happy when I had specific industry template. And I would like to better understand what is the differentiation between the industry cloud and the industry template.
So an industry template was to take, take R3 or ECC and configure it with some unique requirements for an industry, right? But ECC and R3 were really developed for the manufacturing world, right? So taking them into banking or taking them into even other industries that could use a lot of the functionality the base wasn't big enough, right? If you had a base that could tackle every industry in the world, then you could use a template. So that's where the template reached its limits, where, okay, if you want to use financials, if you want to use material management, sure, doesn't matter, I can do it for your industry. But if you want to do claims processing, if you want to do telemedicine, ECC couldn't do that, right? That's where the industry clouds are starting to come in, where they're going after very unique industry functionality that only they may need, right? In retail, you need merchandising. Very few other industries need that, right? So it's been a kind of the expanding the scope of the application, but not trying to sell the big application to everybody and then say, okay, I have this master. I won't just build a template. I actually deliver it only what is needed for that industry. So that's a big difference. By the way, I don't particularly like the term industry cloud, and let me explain why. It's giving the hyperscalers a chance to come in and say, oh, we've got industry cloud. What they're really selling is infrastructure, or they're really selling AI, general purpose AI. If they don't have the functionality, I would prefer they not call it industry cloud. Just call it industry application, or just call it cloud. When you combine the two, I think it gives people an opportunity. Take Oracle, for example, right? They have some industry applications, but they're really selling infrastructure. I'd rather them come out and say it's infrastructure as a service, not call it industry cloud. So I'm a little more tough about diluting the term industry.
How do we get them to obey us, though? Because if there's money to be made, they will use the term they bloody want to use.
Marshall, I've been an analyst for 30 years. They don't care about us. They're going to say what they want to say. They're going to brand how they're going to brand, right?
At least they feed us well.
our job is to educate the buyers and make them a little more sophisticated to say, if you're going to buy industry cloud, don't lose track of the fact that you're looking for industry functionality. The cloud should come along with the industry functionality.
Agreed.
Thank you very much for that better differentiation to my understanding, because I was feeling so lucky that I had in my former business lives, when I was with a vendor or with two vendors, an Austrian and a Swiss one, I had a specific industry template, and cool, I could sell them their processes because I only was in CRM and not in the big tanker. Yeah, the big tanker versus the speedboat is the real challenge. I do now understand. Yeah,
but even in CRM, right? You look at CPQ, for example, right? Configure price code functionality. If you look at how that's evolved, most CPQs were designed for services. So they help you configure services for a proposal. They've evolved. Some of them will support some product mixed in that. But now manufacturing companies, product companies have been selling services more. It's a trend called servitization. Like Rolls-Royce doesn't sell its engines anymore. They sell power by the hour. Now, how do you configure power by the hour? It's got product, it's got monitoring services, it's got maintenance services, it's got financing, it's got spare parts. It needs digital twins, it needs all that, right? So that's CRM. If you don't evolve with an industry change, the definition needs to keep evolving and the functionality needs to keep evolving.
Looping a little back to the term cloud. When I grew up back in the last millennium, so we started with the term industry solutions.
You look younger than me.
Yeah, well, a little, maybe, maybe.
I call myself a dinosaur.
That's just it's just the good maintenance that my family does.
Rob, I've got a suggestion to you. Start calling yourself a baby dinosaur. The dinosaurs are young too.
Yeah, true. Fair enough. So why do you think that the terminology changed so far away from solution to cloud?
Actually, repeat the question. Sorry.
There was a question?
Yeah, so, well, in earlier times, so end of the 90s, beginning of the O's, we talked about industry solutions. And, well, then came Salesforce and everything was cloud. And since we are talking industry cloud, is that to focus on, hey, we are not on premise anymore? Or is that just to, in quotes, because the word cloud is on vogue?
I think it's a little bit of the latter. And when you look at the industry clouds of different providers, it's quite often private cloud, quite often on the hyperscalers cloud. So the cloud definition has become a little more broad over the last few years. Some would say confused, right? If you talk to purists, they want a multi-tenancy, something like a Workday or a Salesforce model, right? When you talk to customers, oil company customers, or some really large chemical customers, they'll say, look, I'm not a purist. I got so many issues to worry about. I got so many data centers that I can run stuff on, and I got a big arrangement with Amazon or Google or whatever. Just make sure it runs in one of those environments, right? Yeah. So they're not as focused on it needs to be run by the vendor in a multi-tenancy settings. In fact, some of them are worried about multi-tenancy because now, since you're running their operations, they don't really want their data to be shared with too many people.
I do have a little objection here, as one of the best-selling arguments towards public cloud potential customers, such as the German army or German armed forces or somebody like this, would not like to be in an Amazon cloud or a Google cloud, but they would go for the SAP owned driven cloud in Waldorf, because they had their rules and regulations and showed the confidence that what they built up there. And I know the lady who was taking care for some time in observating and coordinating with the auditors, Birgit Hess, she said, it's a real cool story if somebody of these bank directors is coming in and said, no cloud for our house, never ever, only about my death buddy. And he is leaving and says, you convinced me. That would work. That would work also for our bank. And therefore, I would say they would love to go for some in the cloud, but it should be a very, very safe cloud for German thinking and German users. Yeah,
Sure.
They are a bit strange.
It's not strange. I mean, it's the customer's choice, right? In the end, whatever the customer is comfortable with.
Yeah.
The
Customer's
one
always right as long as he's paying.
And let's be honest, I mean, we listen a little too much to vendor talk. In the end, customers have to make the decisions. But to your point, 4 or 5 years ago,
Yeah.
I think vendors like SAP, Workday, Salesforce all started to realize we will not be able to compete with the capital budgets, capital expense budgets of Amazon. I mean, we just can't afford to spend $30 billion on data centers and telecoms, right? So that has slowed down their ability to really scale up to really big companies' needs. So it's been a little bit of the hyperscalers have really pushed the pedal. Even Oracle, which is a big company, which has had a hardware with Sun and so on for a while, it's tiny compared to what Amazon spends or Microsoft spends or Google spends. So that's why I come back to, I don't want people to be enamored with their infrastructure capabilities. That's great. But don't just assume that they're also savvy about your industry, right? So
This I take for granted, and this is very much what I experience if I discuss with people, especially if it's software users and they want to have some guidance and advice why they should go for one of these cloud offers. And I say, okay, look for what your vendor is utilizing on their infrastructure advantage to create his industry environment, such as some of the CRM cloud vendors, such as Sugar, say they try to develop their product so that they make benefit out of the core infrastructure technology which is delivered by their cloud provider, in this case Amazon, and they do not reinvent the wheel. That is something which comes probably to an advantage for the user. On the other end, I was quite frustrated that the Microsoft Germany cloud was not, let's say, received as economically attractive as it was thought of. And there seems to be a hiccup with the combination of Deutsche Telekom and Microsoft, and the capability of Deutsche Telekom to understand the specialties of the Microsoft environment.
I mean, look, this is all evolution. I mean, we've been in the industry long enough, right? There is never a perfect solution. And what happens is customers become smarter and smarter, right? So 5 years ago, you could not have convinced anybody that, hey, look, the annual cost of infrastructure as a service is going to be at some point much greater than you running your own data centers. Okay, you could not have sold any CIO on that. Today they wake up and think, my God, how much am I spending on annually on these? Because there's a lot of scale that you sign up for that you don't need 24/7, 365, right? So
cool statement.
The elasticity of the cloud is something customers are just starting to learn how to take advantage of.
So what would be your advice? Because I also have in these offerings and auditings and consultancies, that this scissor between the own stuff, the own infrastructure, and the rented one is clear a challenge in convincing them that both might have some advantages for them.
Give me an example.
Such as if you go for the total cost of ownership for a CRM solution, either out of the cloud, 5-year, whereas you buy the licenses and do a comparison, and you add the yearly service, which was in the old years and in former times partly included in the cloud fee, which is now a service on extra. So then you tell them, okay, you won't have to have your own IT people which take care. Wrong story. You still have a lot of stuff to organize, and you are surprised how many people your IT department still has. So it's smaller. Yeah, the Advantage cloud is getting smaller, and after 5 years, it's such a crocodile's mouth is opening. But probably you have
not just that. You point out. I worked with a client where they said, "Hey, we'll outsource the management layer, right?" And so they thought they were going to save a lot of money. Well, the management layer was one of the big brand name systems integration firms. It wasn't cheap, right? And I tried to convince them, if you're moving to a cloud, you're supposed to reduce the management layer, not replace one with another. So look, customers are becoming much smart, gradually becoming smart, right? You can never convince them about all the risks up front, but they're becoming smarter every month. You deal with new CIO who goes, "Oh yeah, I know what I'm doing now. I didn't 5 years ago."
But is the space? But what about the gap? They may be getting smarter at this rate, but the need for their smartness might be increasing like that. Are they backsliding?
That's the thing about our industry. The pendulum swings back and forth. Different competitors enter. Look, that's. I've been dealing with issues like this from the day I joined the industry.
Circling a little back to
industry clouds.
Yeah.
Eventually.
Yeah, eventually. So you said something like cloud is, industry cloud, you don't like the term for various reasons. A while ago, we talked to John Reed, who said basically the same. He said misnomer. So, and what he says it needs more than, cloud, the term cloud limits it too much. It needs more to deliver a successful industry offering. So you basically a few minutes ago said something similar. So there are different types of industry solutions. The modern ones, easily consumable applications, then some more old-styled ones, in quotes, old-styled ones that offer core processes or core ledgers, core books of records is your term. That leads me to the question, what does it make to become or what does it take to become a successful industry solution? So
before I answer that, let me tell you what SAP is doing, right? They have a lot of industry functionality on premise.
Yeah.
Traditional. They've been working for utilities since 2002, right? So it's a lot of functionality that is still on-premise settings. They have been increasingly developing new modules. So like in healthcare, there is cell and gene therapy for personalized medicine. That particular module is being developed in the cloud. So the master records for that will be in the cloud, but the rest of the master records will still be on-premise, right? So similarly, they're doing that for intelligent returns for retail. I mean, e-commerce returns are now 20% in some cases. It's a major problem for retailers because they have so many returns. And when you get a return, what do you do with it? Do you put it back on the shelf? Do you refurbish it? Do you they donate it to charity. I mean, it's a complex algorithm for every single return. And how do you make it easy for customers? Because there's a customer service issue if that becomes a painful experience. And Amazon keeps raising the bar for that, right? When I can go to Whole Foods with my package, it doesn't even need to be properly packed, and they'll take it back, right? They made it so easy. So intelligent returns is another thing that SAP is. It's a small module aimed at retailers. So more and more they're doing a hybrid of, you will need core transaction processing probably on premise, but you need a lot more of these new functionality we're going to deliver in the cloud. So that they're evolving, kind of taking the customer base into that model. Okay. So does that mean that if I call that the industry cloud, would I forget about the core process that they've been developing for the last 20 years? See, that's the risk with defining the industry cloud very narrowly from a cloud-only perspective, right? That's why I keep going back to show me what the functionality is, because I want comprehensive functionality. I'm not as purist about it has to be in a multi-tenant setting, And a lot of people don't like my point of view. They want me to be very purist about cloud. I'm practical.
Practical is always bad. in how far is industry play an ecosystem play in your eyes?
So this again, I have a slightly different perspective than others. A lot of vendors,
which is good.
Everybody has tried to say, I'll go with Accenture and they'll help me build my oil and gas functionality, or I'll go with Deloitte and they'll help me build this. I came from that world, from Pricewaterhouse, right? Software vendors have way more intellectual property when it comes to verticals than the consulting firms do.
Agree.
But every one of the vendors seems to think magically the consulting firms will bring all this IP for unique processes and just magically bring it to them. Yeah, if you work with them over 100 projects, you'll pull it out. But frankly, if you went to your own customers, 100 of them, you would get a much better specification for what you need to build. Okay. Now, if the integrator partner is also investing in writing the IP, then it's a different value proposition. But quite often they don't. Right? They're not. The business models are so different, right? Software vendors invest in writing code. Integrators don't invest. They invest in training people. That's the biggest investment. They don't want to build IP that then has to be licensed and so on. They just don't think that way.
Yeah, they want billable hours.
They want billable hours for the most part.
How about ISVs then?
So, when you talk about using the ecosystem, by all means, use them as one source of input, but just to say I'll depend on them to help me generate the IP usually fails.
Yeah, but then there's if you take a company even as big as SAP or Microsoft or Oracle, even they can't have all of the knowledge to build a proper industry solution or just a process for any given industry. They
don't, but they have the customer base, right? SAP has 400,000 customers. Trust me. If I wanted to develop something unique for any industry, agribusiness, semiconductor, whatever, if I thoroughly went through my list of 400,000, I would find 100 of the most sophisticated, most leading companies in the industry. You can do surveys, you know who they are, right? And if you went to them and say, hey, look, I will develop for you this functionality, and convince them, give them incentives, all the usual ways of convincing customers, they'll get a much better product.
And I would share that observation, Vinnie, in the way that was exactly the route Bob Stutz took when he went in the CX approach for retail, no left, no right, but took a bunch of good, knowledgeable people and drove the team in 2 years on a parforce exercise to get this done. And that looked good to me. Unfortunately, now there seems to be the air out of that balloon. Bomb is gone. And CX? A big question mark.
Bob told me he's both proud and also surprised that a lot of the verticals he developed for Siebel 25 years ago are still being used by Oracle customers, right? So again, I'm sure he used this approach of highly industry knowledgeable people to build that functionality for it to survive that long. So that was a long answer to your question. Use the integrators, but use them on projects and get out of them very specific industry knowledge. It's a very slow process, I find.
Is it because it's so slow that it isn't being done more? Or are we just not seeing it?
I mean, look, if you say Deloitte has a very good retail practice, do you think they'll give you 10 of their most knowledgeable retail people to work with you for a year? Highly unlikely. They can build those 10 people.
Depends on the rate you pay.
Well, no, but let's say they build a business model, they'd rather take those 10 people and sell 10 teams around them at 10 different clients, right? So it's a very different model. They won't just sell you those 10 experts and say, here, pay me for those 10 experts, right? So, there are ways to structure arrangements where you say, hey, Deloitte, we will share the royalties from the IP. So then you go into a joint venture. You can do it. I just think people, software vendors generally just say, oh, Deloitte's helping me write this, or KPMG is helping me write, Bearing Point is helping me write this, and so on. I haven't seen much very, very good product come out of that.
If I understand you correctly, Vinnie, you suggest that we go for an exercise such as we take some knowledgeable people which have done till now their bespoke individual software, have a core competence in their sector and in their industry, and we get them in our team to create a best of thinking, best of practical doing of a solution in a defined sector. Would that be correct understood?
That would be my preferred approach. If you have the appetite to not just use them for the development, but keep them around to keep enhancing it, to keep maintaining it. A lot of times people use them for just the development and then they forget about, hey, it needs to be continually improved. Now, in working with SAP on this recent book, I did find they have a group of about 50, they call it industry business unit leaders that are very, 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 very smart about individual industries. So I talked to somebody who was very savvy about the semiconductor supply chain issues. In the energy area, my God, I talked to people who were very comfortable talking about the hydrogen economy, nuclear energy sector, obviously the whole renewable sector, the whole EV phenomenon, the charging infrastructure that we need to have. SAP has 600 charging stations in Waldorf. That's one of the world's expert on how do you set up an EV charging environment. They could go to any retailer and say, any oil company and say, as you are thinking about retail pumps, right? Converting your gas pumps into EVs. These guys could give them advice on what to think about, in terms of negotiating with your utility to make sure, the wiring is right, the supply of the energy is going to be reliable, et cetera, et cetera. Very unique issues in each of these sectors. And I was shocked. SAP has so many of those.
Yeah.
They don't show them to the outside world. I told Peter Meyer, I said, these are the best analysts in the world when it comes to industry solutions.
sometimes these guys are crazy. Sorry, but I ask myself what they get them daily prescribed into their tea and coffee, not to talk about those advantages. That drives me nuts. Yeah,
Well,
sorry for being so plain political incorrect. Hallelujah.
again,
Okay, that's for the next
look at the SAP business model. They don't want them to be analysts. They want them to be
Builders.
keeping up with trends in the industry, feeding that to their product developers, and importantly, talking to customers all the time. The value that SAP derives from them is much more than them being analysts and talking to you and me. Much more.
Yeah.
But
No,
I was fortunate to
yes.
meet probably 50 of them across
Yeah.
many sectors in health and energy and the mobility sector. Oh my God, the mobility sector, what SAP is doing, it's unbelievable.
And this is the foundation of the book you wrote, Business as Usual, with a question mark, such as there has to be a differentiation.
Well, business as unusual, first of all. It's not business as usual.
Unusual, Rolf. Unusual.
I was agent provocateur.
And he was close. 2 letters.
The book came about. First of all, I was a hired hand. Thomas and Peter, two of the senior executives, one on the product side, one on the customer side, are the authors of the book. Okay. What I did was I helped interview 50 of these SAP internal resources executives. I interviewed about another 50 partners and customers in unique industry niches, right? So I interviewed about 100 people, and out of that, we came up with 8 megatrends. Now, before we go to the megatrends, it started off because we were having conversations with SAP and said, people are still selling what was available in 2019. The world has turned upside down. Think of the last few years. We've had COVID. We've had the Ukraine energy crisis. We've had climate change urgency. And every major company has gone through major digital transformations. Why are we pretending that industries haven't changed in the last 3 or 4 years? They've changed dramatically, right? We didn't have curbside check-in 3 years ago in retail. We didn't have micro-fulfillment in logistics 3 or 4 years ago. We didn't have telemedicine as important 3 or 4 years ago. Every industry has changed. Why are we pretending that hasn't happened? And so we start with the premise that if you're doing business as usual circa 2019, you're probably at a severe disadvantage. Okay. So between all these interviews, we then came up with 8 megatrends. And they tend to align roughly with industries, but they cross industries, right? So consumer industries, one of the megatrends is new customer pathways, which is a new way of saying it's CRM part 2 or CX part 2, but we took an industry view. So in the SAP definition of consumer industries, retail is included, obviously, consumer product, CPG companies are included, obviously, but it also includes health sciences, because healthcare is now very, very consumer driven, right? It includes agribusiness, because food has now become a major consumer oriented market, right? So it cuts across industries, but we included in the megatrend called new customer pathways. Okay. Another one was sustainable energy. And we looked at oil and gas, we looked at utilities, we looked at the renewable sector, we looked at automobile in terms of EV charging and so on. So I call this a new way beyond verticals. I call it orthogonal. It cuts across industries, it cuts across geographies, it cuts across business processes. That's the next generation of applications that we need to start thinking about. Even verticals have become a little too narrow. A lot of companies, one of the SAP executives told me, he says, "Vinnie, you'll be surprised how many companies big companies are looking at entering new markets." We are seeing it in healthcare, right? Pharmacies are now opening up health clinics. And the initial response from customers is, my God, it is so much more pleasant than going to the doctor's office. They know nothing about me. They ask me to fill out a paper form every single time I go to my doctor's office, right? They have no information about me. At least if I go to a retailer, they have a basic customer profile of me, and they can say, hey, hey, Marshall, we have some basic information about you. Now we can put the prescription information. We can start to include much more about you. It's a lot easier for them to build a consumer/patient profile than healthcare has been able to do. So we're seeing a lot of industries start to go after other people's business. I mean, if you look at financial sector, it's amazing how banks are saying, why aren't we into wealth management? Why aren't we into real estate? Why aren't we into pension management and so on? And light bulb has gone on then.
Well, there used to be laws against that.
Yeah, we can get into adjacent industries and probably do it better than the incumbent players.
Yeah.
And
from the
perspective that arises from the orthogonal applications isn't that a way back to horizontalization and componentization?
No, it's not. No, it's not, because horizontals are very, very. I'm glad you asked the question, because when I was writing the note, I included orthogonal, and I said, wait a minute, this sounds like horizontal. Horizontal to me is general ledgers and MRP and SFA and very, very unique. They have no industry differentiation at all. These orthogonal applications are reflecting a selection of industries and doing something, a new business process that didn't exist 4 or 5 years ago. Like telemedicine.
Okay.
It's been around for 20 years, but it wasn't very, very common. Now it's become very common, right? So that's a unique application that retailers, healthcare people can use. Now retailers are starting to use as you get into healthcare and so on.
Yeah, but it seems all of these new things are being driven by the necessity of the past couple of years. It's all stick driven. Why, I wonder, are these things not more being driven by the carrot? You know,
is it stick or is it carrot? I mean, the words change with COVID, right? Now we can argue about whether lockdowns needed, whatever. I mean, we can get into political conversations about that. But you and I, 3 years later, still enjoy curbside pickup, right? We still enjoy last mile delivery. Food industry's picked up on that too, right? I don't know if I enjoy food delivery. I actually still like to go to restaurants. If I'm going to eat out, I might as well go into a restaurant. But you know what I mean? A lot of people just have become addicted to DoorDash, right? So I don't know if it's stick driven or just markets have evolved.
fair.
Maybe they use the carrot as a stick.
Well, you get into these intellectual discussions on. I can't believe people are so lazy. They won't go into a store. They buy everything from Amazon. They buy everything from DoorDash, or I don't pass judgment on what consumers do, what companies do. Give them choice. In the end, let the market decide.
That's what it's about, yeah.
Yeah, and
That's what it's basically about, is choice, yeah. And
yeah, not everyone is going to have the same ability to shop.
Yeah, I mean, that's one thing we get into in the industry space and energy. It's a very political time right now. There is a view that renewables are it. Everyone should move to renewables. Well, in the book we brought out, obviously because it's a German influenced book, renewables get a lot of play, right? But I had to pull in people from Americans and others to pull in and say, guys, renewables only today fuel 5% of the world's energy. 5%. Germany's been trying for 40 years. You're up to about 40 to 45% of your energy needs. But around the world, they're only fueling 5%. We cannot afford to say, don't use geothermal or nuclear. You can't tell France, forget about nuclear. You can't tell the US, forget about LNG, right? So you got to be careful. You got to listen to markets and say, the market wants it. Let's not demand that they move over somewhere till they're ready to. you can get into a lot of political discussions about that, ideological discussions. I tend to let markets guide me. I don't pass judgment on why people order food at home or go out, right? Give them choice. That was energy was one of the more difficult chapters in the book because it's so political right now.
That I believe, yeah. It's so emotional also.
Yeah, I mean,
getting back a little.
People will guilt you into the world is falling apart. We're gonna be dead in 10 years. So you get into a lot of the emotional, but emotion which has become factual because they believe it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Wow.
Still interesting a bit in the componentization or the orthogonal applications. I do see two trends basically. One is an increasing micro verticalization of applications, and another is basically because it's efficiency also, grouping of industry into one larger chunk so that I can deliver basically the same thing multiple times. So where do you see that this stays a dichotomy, or will that somehow, some ways resolve itself? Or is the problem
let's take a philosophical, financial, capital markets view, right? I think for the last 20 years, the tendency has been your second path. Let's build as much horizontal so we can sell to multiple verticals. I find that usually is a very thin layer of utility for different verticals. But because it suits vendors, because it suits VCs to get a bigger so-called addressable market, that's where a lot of the funding is done. Unfortunately, go back to the statement I made at the beginning, which is, if you look at SaaS applications after 20 years now, if you look at the function points across all industries and all geographies, we haven't penetrated more than 25% because we're all trying to develop the core horizontal processes and pretend that they work in Thailand, they work in energy, and they work in banking and so on. To me, time is now to say, guys, we've tried that. It's still a viable investment strategy. We really need to go into industry specifics now.
So getting more detailed.
I'm not very successful at that. I'm not successful convincing a lot of people, but I keep telling them, here's the white space, guy. Make an investment in one industry a year. You don't have to go into 10 industries altogether.
Now back to the ecosystem question. Isn't that a topic for ISVs also? So software development companies that partner with the big vendors?
Well, the fallacy with that is, why do you expect a startup to develop deep industry functionality when you're not willing to do it? They don't have the capital to do it unless you take the steps to do it, and bring the ISVs to say, I'll invest in you, I'll give you capital to build it. If it's a development effort, you can do it that way. But expecting them to go build all the IP, collect all the IP, the specifications and so on, they don't have the money. For too long, software vendors have said, I'll let the systems integrators do it, I'll let my startups do it, and so on. I just have to look at them and say, if you're not willing to invest $1 billion in an industry, why do you think any of the other guys will be willing to do that?
Honest question on that end. What about Zoho as a player which has a certain foundation in its solid, widespread, horizontal platform, but I not yet find too much industry sectors approached by the vendor, more by customers or partners? Would they have the potential to move forward and also deliver smaller corporations that new world approach?
I've had some conversation with Zoho about this. I hate to distract them. I mean, they're doing so well in the horizontal area because, you know, there's, there's, there's one strategy, keep expanding, moving into new markets and so on. Another strategy is you keep driving the cost of existing functionality down, right? And Zoho has done such a fantastic job with Zoho One. I mean, 90 applications for one price. Nobody else can match them, right? They're kind of commoditizing the market from that sense because their cost of selling is so low. It's digital selling. They're going after markets like Nigeria and UAE and that the Western vendors just cannot even think about because they have a direct sales model. They can't afford to go into these markets, right? So I hate to distract Zoho and say, why don't you think about this vertical or think of this vertical? I think for them, the better approach might be to say, go to a vertical player and say, here's my platform, build on top of that. Let them find joint ventures where somebody can build on top of that. That may be a better approach.
Probably fits better with their corporate philosophy too, from what we've seen. I mean, they're not an aggressive company by any stretch of the imagination. Very, very organic in their approach.
Yeah. And honestly, in verticals, you do need a direct. I don't know if an indirect sales model will work, right? I mean, you need personal selling, either by a channel partner or your own salespeople. I don't think Zoho wants to invest in a sales force. So,
agreed.
To their credit, if they're so successful and so focused, why distract them and tell them to adopt the bad practices of the other vendors?
Very interesting answer. Thanks.
Yeah. You're wonderful. You're perfect. Now change.
Well, I've told them to change, but they politely just say.
Zoho will do what Zoho do, and we just sit back and admire them.
I mean, look, Zoho One is. When I first saw it, I said, "This is Amazon Prime," and they were puzzled. I said, "Amazon Prime started off as a single. All your shipping costs will be included in the price of the membership, right?" And now, if you look at Amazon Prime, they're into
very good comparison.
I mean, they're like 50 services as part of that, right? And Zoho One is similar. People only need 3 or 4 other applications, but suddenly they find. Raju was telling me, I said, "How do you decide which applications to put on it?" He said, "It's an organic thing. We look at where customers are using in the new applications, and then we say, hey, look, they should become part of the Zoho One bundle." So, I mean, it's a phenomenal model. Let's not distract them.
Okay.
Much as very vertical would like them to be verticals, I don't want to distract them too much.
Okay, in the sake of times and following a long time honored tradition of ours, we'd like to ask you for some famous last words for the session, of course, not in general. Looking into the crystal ball for industry solutions, what do you wish should happen in the, let's say, next 12 to 24 months?
I'd like every software vendor to seriously commit to one industry a year. Not just for a year. To start getting serious about an industry, one a year. Okay? Which
so
means
adding one per year.
Adding one per year. Thank you. Because when I go to them, they'll usually be, "Oh, Vinnie, we can't afford to be in 10 industry." Don't need to be in 10 industry. Commit to one that you're most comfortable with, and start building operational capabilities. Start building these new applications that I'm talking about that have become important for those industries, right? So that would be my desire. But I'll be honest, Thomas, I've tried this for 10 years and they keep saying, "Well, I want to do horizontal." And there are a million customers in the horizontals. In the verticals, I only get 10,000. Like, guys, those 10,000 will be 25-year recurring revenue. Believe me.
Exactly.
But, I'm not a good salesperson when it comes to that.
But there are existing examples, such as if you go for some of the partners of SAP in dedicated sectors, they live, as you said, since 25 years in their little ecosystem, and they are the one to go for. Yeah? No other left, no other right. They don't do it the way the others do it.
I think most industry executives tend to look at what their peers are using. Once you get traction, it's kind of a self-fulfilling pipeline. So that's my, that would be my hope, is every vendor commits to at least one industry very, very seriously. Put some money in developing product, get some right partners that are committed long term, but don't just do it as a 1 or 2 year thinking. Think of a 20-year plan. I will commit to 20 years. You don't need to invest all the 20 years in year one, but think long term.
Think big, act small, kind of.
I mean, even SAP, which if you look at they had industry solutions starting about 2003, 2004. In the first few years, they were very, very committed to them. Then it kind of slowed down, right? So, and fortunately, those customers have stayed with them. Now they're developing new applications for them. But you know how our industry is very short-term focused. We don't think beyond year 3. So,
Yeah,
We think of
it would be nice to fix that.
I have no hopes of fixing that. I just keep trying.
Well, then again, as long as we don't fix it, we have regular income.
Well,
That's too
these
practical.
things all come. The pendulum swings back and forth. Our industry is very smart, and that's why we keep changing things.
Okay. Thanks a lot for that. Great conversation. Great insight.
Well,
I
hopefully you got my one little message. Don't ignore the industry part of industry clouds. Don't be enamored by cloud infrastructure and cloud multi-tenancy this and Kubernetes that, and get what is unique to your industry from them.
Well, the three
Big
of
learn
us,
to that end.
I think the three of us are on board. The question is, what about our audience?
Well, any questions from the audience I should answer, or?
I would have put them in.
Yeah, they've been silent today.
They
I
were
think they've
all
been in awe
silently
of your
listening.
prowess.
Yeah.
Well, maybe you only got
silently
one
listening
because
today.
it's not a horizontal discussion.
Yeah. We only addressed the analyst industry vertical. Yeah. Ouch. Okay.
Relax.
So many thanks to whoever was in and still is in. See you next week. Thanks to Vinnie, and we are going backstage now. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you for having me.
Take care.